if anything, what would you change if you were to start your journey again?
Spend time on what matters most.
Powerful. I love it. Spend time on what matters most. That's kind of been the one sentence summary of everything we've talked about today. Sony, 3M, Swarovski, Fitness First, and Pepsi. What do these all have in common? Well, they've all been consulted and helped by Alexis here. I'm super excited to be joined today by Alexis Kingsbury. He's an award-winning entrepreneur, currently running 2 software businesses with remote and global teams, serving over 500 organizations around the world. Alexis, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, already a very strong start with some huge brands on your kind of CV and your experience. I'd love you to kind of go into how that came to be. What was your journey into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've always been an entrepreneurial kid. Like back when I was 12, 13 years old, I was trying to set up businesses, whether it was washing cars, sweeping drives, creating a newsletter. I set up websites and got money on banner advertising. I built computers when I was and built and sold computers when I was at university. Like I was always trying to build businesses and really struggled to make it any more than just me in the business. And so I went and became a management consultant after university. I worked with large organizations and learned how that they deliver at scale without needing a business owner at the very top, using people and processes. That's what it comes down to. And so when I then went and set up my own initially consultancy, and then our first software business, which was Spider Gap, with my co-founder Paddy, we knew that we need to build the business with people and processes. But that was more easily said than done, and we've had so many mistakes along the way that have cost us a lot of money, a hell of a lot of time, nearly cost us our relationships with our significant others and frankly each other. But fortunately we managed to learn from our mistakes and iterate to the point that we've been able to grow the business and do some amazing things. I've now got a globally remote team that are based in 9 countries across 5 continents. We've since after growing Spider Gap, we then set up another software business in the form of Air Manual, which now helps loads of small businesses and medium-sized businesses to document their processes and free up their time and reduce the stress and so on, like essentially solving the problems that we had when trying to grow and scale our own business. So it's been an amazing journey, but not an easy one all the way along.
That's amazing. So you've gone through the mistakes, learned from them, and now you're also making sure that others don't have to suffer the same. And one thing you mentioned is that those mistakes cost you both time and money. And there's in the coaching industry, especially in the kind of consulting in general, there's a saying of don't trade time for money. So I was wondering what your thoughts were around that phrase.
I'd suggest that little phrase probably set me back in my career and my financial security and everything, probably at least 5 years, maybe more. And essentially it's because when I was a consultant, I always had this feeling of I'm trading time for money, and not even feeling like, there was, even back then, there was some content out there at the time talking about trading time for money. And I thought, yeah, I don't want to be doing that. I was reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and Timothy Ferriss's The 4-Hour Work Week and so on, and going, yeah, we need to build a business that, I can be doing 4 hours on a beach somewhere and it runs without me. And, I can't be spending my time in the business. The crazy thing is that I think since then, I know loads of consultants, for example, who have traded their time for money, but traded it for a lot of money, because that's, one of the great things about when you focus and you do use your time is you become a master at things, and people will pay you a lot of money because you can solve their problems really, really quickly. And if you then take that money and do clever things with it, like invest it in property or other businesses or whatever, then you absolutely can create passive income and financial security and a portfolio and so on, without having to do what I did, which is decide, no, I won't spend a load of time doing consulting. I'll do the bare minimum to earn just enough money so that we can grow a software business and fund that painfully and stressfully, and slowly build up a business, which, to be fair, now does run without me. But it's, I think I didn't even consider the fact that I could have done it another way back then. And so I think, nowadays, I think people are starting to realize that like there's really no such true thing as passive income, in the sense that you've got to do some work for it. Like, even if you're like buying properties and so on, like you've got to purchase them. Or even if you decided to use some agent who's going to go purchase them and take a big cut of your money, you've now got to manage that purchaser and provide them criteria, and then you've got to manage tenants or whatever. Like, there's always something you've got to do. Even if like you're investing in stocks and shares, like you've got to have some strategy of when you're going to buy and sell. And yeah, it's not really passive. It can't be, because if it was purely passive, then yeah, where would be the value creation that you're adding? What there is leveraged. You can totally leverage your time. And ultimately, any game of investing or entrepreneurship is a game of leverage. It's basically working out, how can I spend more of my time on stuff that's high value? And that changes over time. When you first start a business, high value is having sales conversations. That's super high value. It's generating revenue, compared to, say, doing admin, which very rarely it becomes a high value task. But then as you grow, even having sales conversations drops down the order to becoming something that you need to delegate and pass to other people, and high value changes for you. It then becomes strategic partnerships, or finding new marketing channels, or coming up with new product ideas. And then even that, as you grow the business, and you keep on growing and growing and growing. But ultimately, it's just that game of looking for where there's greater leverage. But I think often, and I've been victim of this, or the a perpetrator, more accurately, than victim of this too often, is trying to go too high leverage too soon. The classic example is a brand new startup business where it's only them, they're only open a week, and yet their website is designed to make them look like 100-year-old corporate, right? And it's like, it's like, why are you doing that? Why are you trying to use lead magnets and sale, and marketing funnels and videos and so on to try and acquire customers in the first few weeks of you setting up business? You haven't even worked out like how to sell this product yet, and whether there's a need for it, and so on. And I think that's the problem, is that the temptation is to model what success looks like without really appreciating the path that people have taken to get there.
This is already super insightful. I think a couple of things really stand out to me. One was that you mentioned it's about the value of the work. It's the value of the time, what you're doing during that time, and not actually exchanging that for. And the real thing that you should be aiming for is essentially leverage. So leveraging that to do the most high value items. But the other important thing you mentioned there is that this changes. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that things have an order. And it's all about figuring out like what the right thing to do is at the right time, and make sure you don't lose focus, because also having a dispersed focus means that you can't be leveraging time, right? So it's a lack of use. So that's already super, super interesting. And you mentioned, especially like early on, I'd love you to kind of give an example of, you said that don't trade time for money held you back. What exactly did it lead you to doing, and how did that hold you back?
Yeah, so I think what I did, there are a few things that I did in the early days that held me back. So one would be that I was often looking for the answer of how it becomes scalable much quicker. I was thinking, well, okay, I can't be having individual sales conversations, because how can I have a business that's 10 million revenue if I'm having individual sales conversations? What I need to do is create a recorded. In fact, I was jumping not even to I should do a webinar. It was jumping to I need a recorded evergreen webinar that delivers me, money on the regular. And of course, the problem is like you haven't done all the prerequisite steps to learn how to create. What's the content that your audience actually wants? How do you then sell from that? What's the process they need to go through? And those are things you learn by having individual sales conversations, and then having webinars with like 2 or 3 people on them, where you're not selling one-to-one, so you're not able to ask them loads of questions, but at the same time you're not having to only engage through people raising hands or things, right? And it's a journey that you have to go on to kind of work that out. And the mistakes that I made was just trying to do too much of that too soon, like trying to create incredible funnels and document and create systems for how to deliver the consulting or the training or the, whatever it is, and trying to do that too early up front, which is hilarious because it's kind of what I should have done back when I was a teenager starting the businesses. Because back then the mistake I was making is trying to put nothing in. Like, I'd end up so busy, say, washing cars with the time that I had. I wasn't then thinking, hang on, what if I could get someone else doing the actual washing, like one of my friends from school, and instead I will spend more time selling and getting them. Like, that never even occurred to me back then, which is embarrassing. But then
I think that's fair. When you're 13, I think that's fair.
I don't know. There's plenty of entrepreneurs that I know now that are like, basically within, left school at 16 or something and had their first 7-figure business by the time they're 19. You're just like, okay, fair play.
We can't all be that, though. I think that's fair enough. We can't all be soccer blokes.
And I like to think I've done it in my own particular way, and at the very least, particularly done some of the other stuff that's really important to me, including building a family. Right? That was always something that was key for me. Was part of that time for money ideal was I was thinking, well, I want to be in a situation where I can work from anywhere so that I can be wherever my significant other ends up wanting to be, and I want to be able to spend lots of time with them and not have to work evenings and weekends. And my experience as a consultant had made me think that that's what you had to do. Like back when I was a management consultancy for a large firm, I was doing some evenings and weekends, and that's how it felt. The hilarious thing, and that the thing I should have realized, was as soon as I handed in my notice and so that I'd go and start my own consultancy, I remember thinking, well, I need to start work on this new consultancy. So what I'll do is I'll time block. I'll still do my job and do a good job, and I want to leave on a really high note, deliver for my client at the time and so on. But I just made sure I did it between the hours of 9 and 5, and I made sure that I always made time for my lunch hour. And what did I use that time for? Well, at the time, setting up the new business. And it was only afterwards I was reflecting, going, bloody hell, I totally was able to deliver a really good job at 9 to 5 if only I'd learned time blocking earlier. And I think that was one of the other big lessons learned, was like, you get what you create. And vice versa. You create what you get. Like if you're struggling fighting fires in your business, it's probably because you are spending time fighting fires in your business. Like each time you put a fire out and don't solve the underlying problem, guess what? You're going to get more fires. If you're fed up of doing all the things and the way that you try and solve that is just get a few more things done, guess what? You get more things to do. And it just goes in these really weird cycles. And so I think those were the traps that I was just falling in again and again and again, just, getting stuck into the admin or trying to think too big too quickly. And it's this weird oscillation, because I think the challenge with entrepreneurship is that there's essentially 2 states. State 1 is find out what works. And so there is a period of time where you're going I need to find out my target customer, the product, the sales process and the pricing and so on. And then once you've got something that works, you can move to state 2, which is, okay, now document that and get that handed over to someone else, delegate that to someone else, so that you can free up your time to return to the previous and get back onto working out what else works. How else can I reach potential clients, and can I do one-to-many and all these sorts of things. And it's that constant oscillation that grows the business, in the same way as the oscillation between either you're creating demand for your business or you're sorting out the supply. And you're basically just switching between one and the other all the time in the business. And I think if I had learned those sorts of things earlier, I think I'd have had a less stressful experience growing the businesses, and would have done so a lot quicker.
Yeah. Again, super, super powerful. I like the idea of kind of the 2 states. If I use my own words, kind of exploration and scaling, I guess, is the 2. Like exploring what's the product or service you need to create to solve the problem of the market, and then on the other side, once you found that solution, then actually scaling it. And the scaling part of the scaling is, first of all, finding the right channel and the right people to go to, and then once you figured those out and the right way to reach them, then you can scale it up. So yeah,
completely agree.
Again, super powerful. The Code Tribe podcast is powered by Pensight. I want to take this opportunity to tell you more about Pensight and how much value it can provide you and your coaching business.
Pensight is an all-in-one platform for coaches and educators that enables you to quickly and easily build a highly credible page and sell your knowledge with one-to-one sessions, group coaching, courses, Q&As, digital products, and bundles. Payments, scheduling, video calling, client communications, and everything else is taken care of.
All it takes is 5 minutes to set up, and it's free. It's the smartest way to kickstart your coaching business. Sign up to Pensight today at pensight.com. One thing you mentioned as well is kind of like high value tasks and less high value tasks, admin compared to figuring out your offer and all that kind of stuff. Delegation is of course a huge topic, and you're obviously you've been around for a while. You've, dare I say, mastered delegation. Maybe you'd say otherwise, but what are your kind of tips, or what's the right way to think about delegation?
Yeah, so it's hilarious to me because it's funny you say you kind of mastered delegation, and I'd say with any of these kind of disciplines, I'd say you never reach perfection, but in relative terms, yes, I am now a master at delegation. Here's the hilarious thing: it used to be my worst skill. It was my biggest gap, and literally, I remember sharing with my team saying, hey guys, I've done my 360, which of course we used Spider Gap, our own product for it. But I did my 360 and it's like, yeah. And sure enough, it comes out that my biggest area for improvement is delegation. And as I said, I've got to level you with team. I am not good at this. I've never been able to do it. Like I've told you, like my experience with those early businesses. And I'm really like, this is an area that I really struggle with. However, I'm committing to improve it. And so I'm going to be learning, and I'm going to be learning from books and others and so on. And I'll be sharing that experience with you. And I'd appreciate your support and telling me what I'm doing right and what I'm not doing so well and so on. So that's the hilarious thing, is that now I have team members who, joined within the last year or two. They can't possibly imagine that was ever the case. Whereas I do have a few members of my team that have been around with me more like 5 years, and they do remember me saying that. But I think this is good news, because if someone like me, who was an appalling delegator, and even had one of my early managers told me that I'd never be a good people manager because I didn't have the ability to kind of bring people with me and those people skills and so on. If someone like me can do that and do it inside of, I say 5 years, but I've been at this level in terms of my delegation or similar for quite a long time now. So I'd say in probably 6 to 12 months, I turned that around from being my weakest area to being one of my biggest strengths. So I think that should firstly be quite reassuring for people, because I think if you're out there and you're thinking, I've not delegated someone in the past, or I've done so and I've been burned, like it went really, really badly, the good news is there is definitely a way that you can do it right, and it doesn't rely on you having an amazing people skills or emotional intelligence quota, EQ kind of stuff. It doesn't. It is more process and step by step than that, but it does require that you do it well, and you do that consistently, and then you get great results. And
it's also quite hard
go into that.
Yeah, it's also quite hard to let go as well. And if you can mention as well, like how you overcome that fear, I guess, or and then like what is the process of that delegation?
Yeah, so in terms of the letting go, I'd say the first step is to prioritize. Like if you don't identify what it is you need to let go of, then sure, it's incredibly difficult for you to start that process because you haven't even accepted that it's something you need to let go of. So the first thing is identify what are the lower, in relative terms, value-adding activities that you're currently doing. So for example, I was working with a business owner of a printing company, is working 60-hour weeks, so 7 days a week. He told me the business is killing him, didn't even have enough time to work out how to free up his time, never mind, do anything else. And so, I remember on that conversation, I said, well, I'm glad that we're having the conversation, was the first thing, because he'd been tempted to cancel it. And I said, well, where are you spending your time at the moment? Because he couldn't even think about like where to start just saying. So where are you spending your time, like in terms of low value in tasks, like where are you spending most of your time? And he said, well, he listed a few things. And I said, of those, what's taken the most? And we identified that sending quotes to customers. So customers ask him for a quote for a print job. He has to provide a quote. He said that was taking 3 hours per day. So that's 15 hours per week. And there were a few other things, but I said, before, like, because his temptation was to run off on all the others. But actually, the starting point is just to go, that one thing, right? It's not a high value adding task for me. It's taking up 2 days a week of my time. Like, if I fix this, that's my weekend back. That I need off my plate. And that's the starting point, is first identify a few tasks and prioritize just one to hand over. The next thing is identify who should be doing it instead. And it might be that you've got someone in your team that you can pass to if you've got additional team members. But if this is your first one, it might be a freelancer. It might be that you need to make your first hire. And if you're going to hire a person, then I would suggest identify a series of activities or responsibilities that can be packaged together into a role that you're going to pass over. But even like if you've got an existing team member, you can use a freelancer, like even one activity can be passed over. And then the next stage is capture it as a series of high level steps. So literally and that's what we did with this business owner. So, he said, with that particular process of sending quotes to customers, he said, I know I should document and delegate it. I just haven't found the time. I figure it'll probably take me 8 hours. I said, we've got 45 minutes left on the call. Let's see what we can do. And we got the whole process documented in under 30 minutes. And we literally just captured it at high level steps. So, what are the high level steps that you go through? We then added a bit of detail in terms of the things that are tricky or the logic that you need to go through, or where the common or high impact mistakes tend to get made, add little warnings in there. And then schedule some time to walk through with the team member, in his case, an account manager, but let's say it's a freelancer or whatever, and get them to follow the process so that they go through and they, tick it off and go, yeah, I've done this, while you watch, which gives you an opportunity to A, answer any questions they've got, B, go, oh, I didn't mean that, or you're about to make a mistake, here's how to avoid it. But then the key is then, update it in the guidance so that they can refer to it. And when you do that, it means that now you've agreed exactly how they're going to do a particular activity, something that might take you 15 hours per week. You've agreed exactly how they're going to do it. If they have any questions, if they make any mistakes, you can go back to that checklist and say, okay, where is it in here that led to that mistake, that problem? And then you can answer the issue and ask them to update it and continuously improve it. And it means that suddenly you can free up huge amounts of time. Initially, 15 hours at a time, and over time, there's some, you can always find, as I say, that's why value adding is relative. Initially it might be admin, but give it a few months and maybe it's sales conversations or managing and hiring team members. So each time you do that, you just free up time, and it allows you to spend more time on high value adding tasks. So by going through that process, you're making it very easy for the person to do a really good job for you. Now, of course, recruiting a good person that can do it and all these sorts of things are separate issues. But if we're fundamentally talking about how do you just hand over a task, there's very few ways to do it as effectively as that. Like, you, of course, you want to be clear on what's the outcome that you want and so on. But if you stop there, the opportunity for variance and mistakes and so on means that you often, I find that I end up going, oh, I should have just done it myself. And that's the trap that you end up looped back into when delegating goes wrong.
Yeah. I think it's also probably worth mentioning that as well as delegating to people, you can also delegate to a process or an automation of some sort. So, for example, that quoting example could be an Excel table where you just enter in some numbers and actually spits out, according to a formula. So there's automations as well to think about, as well as people that might make sense to delegate to.
Yeah.
Although I think it's also maybe interesting to kind of touch on like the reverse issue, which you alluded to earlier, about how some people love automating things and then they actually spend more time thinking about how to scale themselves when they shouldn't be scaling it. And like, how do you know that it's not too early to scale?
Yeah, and that's often, because I'm a bit of a geek for this stuff. So as a result, I've always liked automations and using those sorts of tools to do these amazing things. These days, I'm a bit more hesitant, which is funny. I think there are loads of areas where automation adds a lot of value. But one of the things I see is that when you're a bit too trigger happy with it, you create quite a lot of complexity in terms of managing those automations. And so when things start breaking, you become the only person in the business that knows how to fix them. And suddenly what you've created is quite a complex job. If you now want to delegate that and free yourself up from fixing problems in automations, you need someone pretty highly skilled. They need to be really comfortable with that kind of tech. They need to be really good at managing those automations, holding that complexity in their head. And you've then got to spend a load of time training them and helping them understand how all of those things work. Now, that's not to say you don't do it, but I think that in some cases, myself included, like you can end up creating a bit of a rod for your own back. And it took me quite a long time before I was able to pass over some of those things to team members. And now when we do automations, one of the things that we look for is how to make the automation simple. You know, like the temptation, I've done it myself with like automatic marketing systems like what was Infusionsoft, now Keep, and so on. Like in the past, created the most amazing flowcharts and automations and so on. And then you realize, I'm the only person that can understand all of this. And teaching someone else it is really hard because even I forget, like, you know, week to week or whatever. So, yeah, it's important to keep that simple. And so I'd agree that automations are great, but starting off with delegating to people is a really powerful thing to do.
Yeah, awesome. In general, most people or business people, coaches, consultants, or larger organizations, they know that they should document and delegate. What are often the pitfalls or the reasons why these are either failures or they don't happen at all?
Great question, because I think the reality is that I think, you know, most people, if you've read books like The E-Myth or Traction or Scaling Up or whatever, like they tell you that they tell you the answer. You know, you need to document and delegate to free up your time, reduce the stress, reduce the mistakes, allow you to grow, and so on. And that's kind of the answer. The problem is that most business owners have tried to do that. They've documented stuff in Word and created flowcharts in PowerPoint and maybe even done some stuff in Visio, whatever. And even used things like Asana and Loom and Monday and, you know, all these sorts of tools. And it becomes a mess, and it becomes impossible for your team to be able to find things easily. And even if they can find the stuff, find the guidance, it's often not easy to follow. And then even if it's easy for them to find and follow, it's often not easy and quick for them to update. So it goes stale. And as a result, as that business owner, you've spent days or weeks creating all the documentation. And then a few months later, you're finding that you're the only one that does any updating of it, and people aren't following it anyway, and you can't really hold a realistic expectation for them to do so. And so I think that's why a lot of people end up kind of going, oh, I've tried documentation and yeah, it didn't work for me, and therefore I move away from it. And I think it's similar to, oh, I've tried hiring and it didn't work for me, and therefore I'll never do it again. It's like there's a huge difference between hiring and hiring well, and managing well, and documenting your processes and documenting it well. And it's that nuance is the difference, you know, in the same way as you can't just do a advert campaign on Facebook, it doesn't work, and decide, well, Facebook doesn't work for my business then. Like, you have to do it in a particular way to be likely to get good results. In the case of documenting, there's a few principles that you absolutely need. So firstly, you need everything in one place. Because if not, then you can't set a realistic expectation that your team will find and follow the processes. Secondly, you need to make sure that the processes are interactive and that it's easy to make them simple and user-friendly to follow. Because if you're giving someone a 30-page Word document where they can't interact with it and follow where they're at, it's so slow that they may as well just do it from memory or check in occasionally. But then they miss steps, and, you know, when they walk away from it and they come back, they can't remember where they left off. And so they start the wrong place or waste a load of time. You need that information tracked. But then you also need the ability to update it, and you need the ability to update it live instantly, because otherwise, when someone makes a mistake or when someone asks a question and you go, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, here's the answer. You want them to be able to make that live to that process, because if not, and they take a little note to maybe do it later, firstly, they might forget. Secondly, when they do come to update it, they won't have the context. You won't be able to see what they've written, so you won't be able to check that they've done it, you know, captured it accurately. And as a result, it makes it really hard to keep things up to date and continuously improve and all those sorts of things. So those are some of the key things that you need to have in place for your sort of process management. It's why we created Air Manual, because we tried loads of tools. We had a patchwork of stuff that couldn't do it. And so that's why we created the tool in the first place. But having that in place is the key. And then the other things that I've already talked about around how you document do matter. Like not adding all the information, just starting off with some high level steps. Not trying to document everything in detail from day one, just starting off with some of the low value activities or activities that are currently, or processes that are currently causing pain, get some impact early. It's things like that that do make a difference. And, we do a podcast, destressyourbusiness.com, where we literally talk about these things because the nuance makes such a difference. It's the same with a little bit like with managing people. Like if you just said, how do you manage people effectively? Make sure you have a weekly one-to-one with them. That is good advice. But if you then don't know and don't do a good job of how you do that one-to-one with your employees, it may as well, there's a risk that you may as well not bother, or you might make things worse. And actually there's a little bit more guidance and nuance on exactly how you do that and how you do it effectively. It makes a lot of difference.
And we've touched on the final topic that I'd love to cover, which is people management and building a team, really. We spoke a bit earlier, and you mentioned that you made a few mistakes when hiring people, especially earlier on in your career. I'd love you kind of explore what were those mistakes and what did you learn from them? What can other people learn from it?
Yeah, so I've made a lot, but I'll major on two big ones. So the first big one was when I hired a salesperson. They're really experienced. They'd done £1 million worth of sales of an equivalent product the previous year. So I was super excited. I thought this person's going to absolutely help us go to the next level. I didn't want to ruin the magic, so I didn't give them any. I didn't really give them any onboarding, guidance, training processes, etc. I kind of figured, well, they'll know what they need. They know better than I do, and that was the big mistake. By not giving them that, I didn't set them up for success. They, as a result, found it really difficult to sell. They didn't get sales results even as good as me. And after a few months of them saying, "Oh no, I think it'll be all right. I think it'll be all right." Eventually, it's like we're going to run out of cash, and we had to make them and a developer we'd hired at the time redundant, because otherwise I would have crashed into the mountain, right? So that was super painful. It nearly broke us, frankly, both financially, but mentally, and even our relationships with our partners. And so that was a time when, our business journey could have stopped there together between me and my co-founder. But the big lesson that we took was, and it's an extension of what I was describing around documenting the checklist. You need to provide new employees with onboarding when they join. You need to provide them with a series of things that they need to do and learn, and guidance that they can refer back to, so that they can do a good job based on what works. And if you don't do that, then don't expect to get consistent or decent results. So I think that was the first mistake we made. The second one we did was, after learning that, we hired someone into the company, did a really good job of their onboarding to help them get up to speed, adding value, delivering results. And so this was the first time after that car crash of a hire, where we were kind of like, oh, hang on, we've cracked it. We worked out some targets they need to hit. We worked out how to train them up to do that. They're now making sales. This is working. This is fantastic. It's like, great, leave them to it. And we didn't have the management processes in. We'd done the onboarding, and one of the things we do now is make onboarding self-service, which I actually did a LinkedIn live on this morning on the date of recording. Again, at destressyourbusiness.com, you can get it on how to make it self-service, because that then frees up your time, because you're not having to spoon feed them a load of information. But so we were doing pretty good at that, but we didn't have any management processes. And as a result, the person handed in their notice after 11 months because they were like, I don't really feel supported. I don't really feel appreciated, empowered, all those sorts of things. You go, oh no, we massively appreciate you. We were loving the fact you were giving us freedom. And so realizing that actually you do need weekly one-to-ones. You do need the team meetings, the daily huddle calls, the cross-team wave calls that allow them to connect with other people in the team. You need performance reviews. You need opportunities for them to plan their personal development. You need those processes around it, which actually don't take a huge amount of time, but are amazing levers for as a manager, you being able to drive business performance through the growth and development and performance of your people. Plus, it keeps them in the business, keeps them happy, and it means that ever since that, we've not had someone leave the business for not, without it being a really good reason. And that's important. Like, if you've got people leaving your business that A, you'd rather not, and B, there's not a really good reason, like some personal circumstance, that's typically it costs you 3 times the amount of their salary when they're walking out that door, and sometimes more, depending on how much time you then need to spend doing their job and yourself as the business owner. So it's like, that's absolutely crucial.
That's a huge impact, and two super powerful lessons. Thank you so much, Alexis. It's been great to have you. Now, moving to the final quick rapid fire 5 round. As you know, this is something that we like to do on our podcast, and spring 5 questions to our guests to get their first response that comes into their head. Are you ready?
Ready.
Awesome. So the first question is, if anything, what would you change if you were to start your journey again?
Spend time on what matters most.
Powerful. I love it. Spend time on what matters most. That's kind of been the one sentence summary of everything we've talked about today. Alexis, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
I've loved it.
People can find you on your Pensight profile, so pensight.com/x/Alexis Kingsbury, and we'll be linking everything, of course, in the show notes as usual. Alexis, any final words?
No, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. As you say, links are on the profile. People can reach out to me on social media as well. And otherwise, we've got some resources at airmanual.co as well, where people can find that. But yeah, I'd love for people to reach out to me. I'm always very happy to help with any questions that people have got.
Awesome. Thanks so much again. Hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode, and catch you on next week's episode of The Coach Tribe. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hope you enjoyed this episode.
We'll be releasing every Wednesday, so make sure to
subscribe
and rate us 5 stars where you're listening to this show to give others a chance to discover it too.